It's Monday as I record this, and the last time I worked on heat signature was Thursday. So I had a 4-day break. This is amazing to me. It's part of a new thing I'm doing where a little while ago I was looking at, I have this big to-do list for heat signature, and it's really big. It's thousands of words, and it's kind of like, it's the kind of the highest level overall breakdown of all the things I think I need to do to finish the game. And finishing the game is a nebulous concept, but it's kind of like, here's what I have planned right now, and the plan might change, and I might take things out, I might add things, but it's my best guess of like, if I had to pick only 25 things to do, or more maybe, these are the 25 I would pick, and it's, when I consider all those things together, it's a very exciting prospect. I really like the idea of that finished game, and if I did all those things and they all worked out exactly as I expect, it would be great. I know from past experience that I almost certainly won't do all those things. I almost certainly won't do exactly those things. I will probably change a lot of them, I'll remove a lot of them, I'll add some others I haven't thought of yet. But it's my best guess at the plan for the game. And the problem with it is that at one point it added up to an okay amount of time, like an amount of time where I thought like, yeah, I can do that. And then I did one of the things on that list, and it was adding tile fringes, which is a kind of like an aesthetic thing that improves the way the edges of ships look. The ships are made out of these squares, and if you just bolt a bunch of squares together, you get a random ship, and it's cool. But the edges need a certain amount of extra attention just to make sure that like the outside module of a ship needs a different kind of edge to it than the inside module of a ship, because the inside module of a ship is connected to others, and when you bolt things together, that looks different to when you have them facing space and being the exterior of the ship. So that needed a bunch of attention. Our artist John Roberts has always had a really clear idea of how that should work, and had given me the assets to do that, and it just took me a very long time to get around to it, because it was never the highest priority. And then one day I sat down and said, okay, I'm going to fucking solve this thing. And it required, I think every module now has to have another 64 variables to track all the different fringe pieces it might need. And it all works, and it looks really good, and it really adds a lot. But making that, I put it down on my to-do list as I think a one-day job, and it just so wasn't a one-day job. It was like a week. It was a big fucking job. There's just a lot to that. That is a difficult fucking task. It might seem minor, but it's worth doing, and it's a big task. And I did it, and it went well, and it looks great, and it was worth the time I spent, and it's really kind of solved a big visual problem we had. But at the end of it, I felt bad about myself. I felt annoyed and frustrated and behind and daunted by everything else, because I was like, this thing, it was down as one day, and it took me 4 days, and if everything on here takes me 4 times as long as I think it does, I'm fucked. This is it. It's over. Or it's going to take more than another year. It's going to be a long, long time. And it's weird because I'm not bored of working on heat signature. I really enjoy it. I love it. I'm really excited about the game. I love the game. I love playing the game. I love working on the game. I love my ideas for the game. And that, what am I? I'm more than 1 year in, but I'm not 2 years in. I think about 2 years into Gunpoint, I was sick of it. I was not wanting to work on it any longer than I absolutely had to. I was like, how do I get this out? And certainly 2.5 years into Gunpoint, that was a point where I'm like, I just need to fucking finish this. I don't want to work on this anymore. I need to get it out there. And I did. I took a break from my day job, and I burned through a whole bunch of stuff really quickly, and I got it done. Heat signature, I'm not sick of it. I don't think I'm going to be sick of it anytime soon, but I'm just scared of it. I'm just scared of how much stuff I could do to it, and how big a job that would make it, and how long it would go on. And I'm scared that this point, when you get sick of the thing you're working on, it's hard to predict. You don't know when it's going to happen, really. And I don't know whether it's a factor of just pure time investment, or whether there's an element of, like, how good is the game. Because I think this is a bigger and more complex and more interesting game than Gunpoint. So if that's a factor, that means I can work on it for longer without getting sick of it. And it's not like I need to get it out for any financial reason. It's not like I need to get it out for any life reason. There's nothing unpleasant about my life that means getting heat signature out there is an important thing I need to get done. There's no urgency there. The only urgency I feel is just, what if I get sick of it? What if I get sick of it next month? If I get sick of it next month, there's so much more to do after that, and I'm going to have to spend all those months doing things without liking them and being sad about it. So I'm terrified of myself, basically. I'm terrified that I am going to get sick of it. And there's no hint that that's coming. There's no sensation that this is less exciting than it used to be. It's actually much more exciting. And so I've changed I looked at that to-do list. I looked at the thing I said was 1 day and turned out to be 4 days. And I went through it again and said, okay, if that 1 day was actually 4 days, they're not all going to be that bad, but let's be a bit more generous. Let's look at these things that I've said are 1 day and think realistically, is that really 1 day? Do I know enough about the challenge of doing that thing that I can say I can do it all in 1 day? And most of the time, no. Most of the time, 2 days. Most of the time, 3 days, maybe something like that. And some things I had down as 4 days before. And if a 1 day thing is actually 4 days, a 4 day thing is 16 days. Stuff like that. I had a very painful session of being, not trying to get a more realistic estimate, because you never know, you just don't know. There's no way to be accurate about this stuff. But just to be more generous, just to be like, okay, given that we know things take longer than you think, what should we put here? And I upped them all to a realistic thing where I thought, it'll be this or it'll be less than this. It's not going to be maybe it'll be a day more than this, but it's not going to be a lot more than this. If it's a lot more than this, I just won't do it. I'll just skip it. If I get to 16 days on this fucking thing and it isn't working yet, I'll just bitch the whole feature and I'll feel really sad, but I'm not going to spend 32 days. That's not what's going to happen. So I went through and did that. I was feeling good about yeah, this is much better to do. This is much more realistic. This is the way you should do it. And then I looked at the actual total for all those different items and added them all up and realised, oh, now it's a 3-year game. Now it's not going to be done anytime soon. It's just fucking massive. It's just horrible. I'm certainly realising I might have talked about this before. I certainly tweeted about it at the time when I added these things up, and I joked that that basically I'd added up all the things with much more realistic estimates and then decided to go back to the old schedule because the new realistic estimates were too depressing. And then I keep thinking about this and just thinking I remember with Gunpoint, my biggest revelation there, well, the biggest one about production and scheduling was I kept announcing release dates, I kept having to delay it, and that was always bad news and I always felt bad about it. And I realised at some point, this is ridiculous. I've just invented a bad news factory. I'm just making bad news out of nothing. I am having fun, the game is really good, the game is getting better every weekend that I work on it, and I don't resent working on it, I like working on it, I'm being productive, the thing is getting better, and that's causing bad news. That's causing me to have to repeatedly announce, bad news, that thing I said before, I was incorrect, you were waiting for this thing by this certain date, you're not going to get it then, I'm disappointing you, I'm delaying it to the other date. And it was just what the fuck am I doing? What the hell is the point of that? Who gains from me announcing release dates that are false and make me stressed out and don't benefit anybody and just make me constantly have to disappoint you? And so I realised let's just forget release dates. Just never even announce any kind of release date. Just the time when I actually did announce a release date for Gunpoint after that was when it was a week out from actual release. But that wasn't why I announced it. I didn't announce it because I thought I was a week away from release. I announced it because the game was actually done. I announced it because I have a game that I could release today if I had to. That's the time when you announce a release date. It's an absolute hard and fast rule I think I'll stick to for the rest of my independent game development career, that I will not announce any release date until I have a game I can actually release right now. There's no leeway. Don't give yourself any kind of expectation. Don't ever predict when it's going to be done. You know when it's going to be done, when it's already done, and you're giving yourself another full week at least to polish or tweak or to look for new problems and improve it. But you have to have a thing that's already ready to completely release to the public, to millions of people potentially, and that you'd be happy for that to happen to. So that's what I'll do with Heat Signature. And right now I'm going through a kind of similar revelation where I've already learned that lesson. I haven't announced a release date for Heat Signature, and I never will. And that's great and that's working out well, but I'm still pressuring myself into finishing it by a certain date. I'm still thinking about the end date. I'm still thinking about how much do I have to do before I finish the whole thing. In some ways, maybe that's healthy because you if it is too far away, it encourages you to really cut stuff, to be brutal and just rip things out that aren't working. Not that aren't working, sorry, that are in the plan that you realise aren't essential, that don't absolutely have to be done. That's the sort of criteria by which you decide. And so in some ways that's good, but then I look at that to-do list that takes an unacceptable amount of time, and I look for things I can rip out, and I just can't. There's nothing I can rip out. The only thing is, the least essential thing on there is story. So right now Heating has no story, it's just a completely randomly generated game, you just play it. You play a character that might have a name maybe, and will randomly generate your appearance, but they'll know you won't say any words ever. You'll just take missions from randomly generated factions that have no personality yet, and they'll all be essentially identical to each other, and you'll be fighting a kind of meaningless war between factions that are effectively the same as each other. And none of that's terribly compelling, but adding story to that is the least essential thing on my list. So if I'm going to cut something, it would be cutting that, and I don't know. I'd like to do some story. I don't know why I wouldn't do some story. That's the thing I like doing. It's not excessively difficult. It's a bunch of extra work, but it doesn't feel like something I should cut. And if I don't cut that, like, none of the other stuff is cuttable. None of the other stuff is like, it's just finishing things I've already done. So I realised I can't really be thinking about the end date. I can't sort of live my life with this sensation that I did have of, I need to get heat signature out of the way, which is a weird thing to feel about a game that you love working on and that you've never given a release date for, that there's no publisher pressuring you to hit milestones, there's no financial pressure to get it done, I'm not running out of money, I will be fine for a very long time, and I like working on this thing, and I'm still thinking in terms of, I just need to get this done, I need to get it out of the way, I need to get it finished, I can't be this long, it can't take this many months, can't take this many years. But really, there's no reason. When I finish it, what am I going to do? I'm going to start a new fucking game, probably. And there's no end in sight. There's no, like, it's not like, I've got to get this work out of the way so that then I can relax. That's not what's going to happen in my life. I don't relax by not working. I relax by working. This is what I do to entertain myself. If I don't do this, I start to get bored, frankly. I just don't, what the hell else am I doing in my life? This is the most interesting thing I found to do with my time and my energy and my attention, and if I stop doing it for too long, I start to get bored with life. There's just, in fact, when I work on something, when I work on heat signature for a bunch of days, I'm really immersed in some problem, and like lately I was generating galaxies. That was my problem for the last, in the last month or so. That's been the predominant thing, is let's generate a galaxy, let's populate it with space stations, let's connect them with trade routes, and that involves a whole bunch of interesting algorithmic things, a whole bunch of random generation questions, a whole bunch of design questions, a whole bunch of high-level design questions about how the metagame works and how the individual missions you do fit into the metagame, and things like your personal psychological motivation of your character. Who am I? Who do I work for? Why do I work for them? If I'm working for money, why do I need money? Is it to support my family? Is it to get out of this place? Is it to buy something in particular? Is it for survival? Have I endured some hardship in my past? That psychological stuff tying into the objectives of the faction you work for, which boils down to which space stations do we own, which space stations do we not own that are nearby to us, what do they produce? Do they produce oxygen, water, food, fuel, ship parts? Do we need ship parts? Are we run out of ship parts? Are we low on this particular resource? Should we capture that space station? Your psychological motivations tie into that factional motivation. Your factional motivations tie into the galactic map and the geography of where are the space stations. Where are the space stations? They all have to be within a nebula cloud. Space stations are planted there in order to harvest the minerals and gases of the nebulae. So you don't get space stations out in the void. So where we generate those clouds of gas determines where the space stations will be. Where the space stations are determines which space stations are connected to each other by trade routes. The trade routes determine which faction the space stations belong to. The factions they belong to determine who lives there, why they live there, who they like, who they hate, what they're trying for in life, why they take on missions if they're a breacher like your character, and why they do those things. And in addition to all that geographical stuff, there's also some physics to it, in that if you have a trade route that goes across between these two stations, and you're like, that's an enemy trade route. There's these two enemy stations, and there's a trade route between them. And then you work for a friendly faction over here. You have a station there, and then you do a mission against like a station over here, and you capture it, or you destroy all its trade routes. You interrupt its trade routes so that it can't get any supplies anymore. And then the people who own that station, your enemies, they have to evacuate their station, which leaves it neutral and vulnerable for you to take. You can't take it because there's a trade route going across here. So there's a physical reason why you can't forge a new trade route to this other station and expand your faction's territory. I know I've gone way off base here. I know I'm rambling into the absurd intricacies, but the reason I'm talking about this is because this is why it's fascinating, and why I love working on it, and why I've spent a month on this thing. And it's also a good example of what I want to talk about, which is the scope of heat signature has expanded dramatically since I started it. It was going to be I'll kind of go back to what it was going to be originally. So very early on, I didn't know what it was going to be at all. I was just going to be going inside spaceships. That was it. Then I was trying to think, who are you? Why are you in this little ship that can board other ships but can't do anything else? And I thought maybe you would be the captain of a big ship, and every time you start the game, it would be destroyed by another ship, and you would eject. So you'd be in the captain's seat, and when your big ship is destroyed, you would eject from it, and then you'd be in this little pod, and that's what you would be in heat signature. The escape, basically, your breacher pod would be an escape pod, and your task in life would be to find the ship that destroyed your ship and hunt it down and board it, and then kill the guy who destroyed you. And it would be a kind of like procedural revenge fantasy that you just play again and again, and each time you play it you get destroyed, and each time you have to seek revenge on that person. And that's when, so one of my previous video blogs was about just all the different ways that you could narrow down an objective. Given one objective, how could you make progress towards it? And eventually I decided you shouldn't make progress towards it, because that turned it into too much of a kind of step by step, just do what you're told, kind of Simon Says type thing. And that's why I was thinking about that stuff, was because I thought the game was about one objective. I thought you would just start, be given one objective, complete it, or don't. And that's how roguelikes work, right? That's how Hoplite works. You have to get to the Feast of Yendor or you die. Arcane Tower, which I'm playing a lot right now, iOS mobile game like Hoplite. I think it's also about the Feast of Yendor, but you basically have to break these 3 red pyramids at the end of it, and you either do that or you don't, and you die. And Invisible Ink, a fucking amazing roguelike that I've been obsessed with lately. I just completed it the other day, and it's a game where you complete a specific story-driven one-off objective that it doesn't make sense to repeat. You would never do that again. After you've done it, I won't say what happens at the end, but it's a thing where after you've done it, you would never do it again. The whole setup for Invisible Ink is you are on the run because your base has been destroyed, and you have 72 hours to fix that situation, and at the end of it you kind of resolve that situation, but you would never do it again. And that's what Heat Signature is going to be. It's going to be a game where you play it, you finish it, then you start again. And it turned out to be hard to make. That was the thing that changed my mind about that. It was like, the systems for this, like the very basic systems were quite easy, but then things like ships being procedurally destructible, things like if you blow up this module, not only does that module disappear, but if you destroy the whole centre part of the ship, the 2 halves of the ship need to split apart, and now they effectively function as 2 different ships, one of which has a cockpit and thrusters, one of which might only have thrusters and turrets, and then those turrets don't know how to fire because they don't have a cockpit connected to them, and the thrusters don't know where to go because the cockpit's not telling them where to go, but then maybe the cockpit section doesn't have any thrusters, and it knows where it wants to go, but it can't go there because, so you're making almost like creatures, you're almost making like a brain and limbs, and if the limbs aren't connected to the brain, they can't function. And in addition to all that complexity, and the geometric kind of spatial complexity of how do we detect when this ship has been split in 2 versus just having a big hole in it. That's one challenge. The much bigger challenge is when it does split, you have to, on the fly, create a new instance of this ship object, assign all of those modules to that new one, keep all of the other modules on the old ship object, but also remove the ones that split off. And then, that sounds difficult enough, but then in addition to that, if another ship was attacking that ship that got split in half, if this ship's target, you obviously, like spaceships when they're fighting each other, need to set, like, I'm trying to kill that spaceship, I need to know what that spaceship is, it has an ID number. So you're tracking the spaceship, you're going to destroy it, and then the player goes and splits that spaceship in two. Now there's two different spaceships that both have different IDs, and in the first version of this, when the easiest way to do the splitting mechanic was to have it actually create two new ships, so that neither of the new ships would have the old ID. So if a ship was chasing it, it would lose the target because it was tracking spaceship number 13, and the new spaceships were number 26 and 39, so there would be no spaceship 13 anymore. So even if you know that's going to happen, even if you account for that, which one should it track? Which ship should it go after? And there's so many things about when you create a ship, you set all these specific variables and specific kind of things about how many vessels does it have, where it's going, what faction does it belong to, all these specific variables about what a ship is and does. And when you split it, you have to copy all those across, and then from then on, everything you change about how ships are created, you have to remember to change it not just when ships are created, but also when ships are split in two, and it's just a massively complicated thing. So heating the ship became complicated, and that meant that making this replayable revenge fantasy thing just didn't appeal anymore. I don't want to make Hoplite, I don't want to make Arcane Tower, I don't want to make 868 Hack, even though all those games I absolutely love. It's like if you built, this is a much, much bigger scale example, but if you built Skyrim, you wouldn't then make an 8-level roguelike out of it, because it was so much fucking work to make Skyrim. It was so difficult. You made an open world, you've gone through all that difficult stuff of doing that, then you wouldn't limit it to 8 levels. You wouldn't limit it to one story that you just play through, and when you finish the story, you've got to start that story again, or you've got to stop playing. Like, that's what all those games do. They have a very light story, but it's here's who you are, here's your objective. Once you complete that objective, the game is over. And so I realised that doesn't really make sense for Heat Signature. If I'm going to go to the trouble of making an essentially infinite world where you can go anywhere, do anything, I had all these classes you could be this, you could live this life, you can live that life, you can do this. It didn't make sense for it to be a very limited roguelike. So I kind of expanded the scope, which is a thing that you're not meant to do. Like, it's a thing I've warned against in the past, like, don't watch out for feature creep, right? That's the sinister word, where you start working on a game and then you keep getting new ideas for new features you could add to it, and you keep adding to the scope, and the scope gets bigger and bigger, and then you never finish, because there's always something else you could add. And so, if you're going to do feature creep, if you're going to add features to your thing as you go along, you need to have some reason why that's not just feature creep. Because if it's just feature creep, you shouldn't be doing it. You should be finishing the thing you started. You should be just getting it out there. And I am adding features. I'm adding a lot of features. I'm adding a galaxy map. I'm adding nebulae. I'm adding factions. I'm adding space stations. I'm adding all this stuff, which wasn't in the plan. At some point it wasn't in the plan. So I think the distinction between the reason I don't feel like I'm wasting my time and that it's a terrible sort of scope drift is the other word you could use, where you kind of set out to make one game and then you start to decide, but I'd also like it to be this other game. I'd like it to also be this other game. That's expanding the scope. And one of the things a phrase I use in my own head when I'm planning things pretty vigorously is beyond the scope, which is a legal term that you use in a court case when someone raises a point and it's outside the question of whether or not this guy murdered that guy. And you just say it's beyond the scope of the investigation or beyond the scope of the case or whatever. And I use that all the time in design, because there's loads of things where it's like, it'd be nice. Well, no, that's just beyond the scope. Heat Signature is about being a breacher, and a breacher is a type of kind of space commando stroke spy, sort of an agent, an extraordinary agent, or someone who's beyond just being a spy, beyond just being a commando, someone who is an incredible shot with every weapon, who is an expert at close combat, who can move silently at great speed, who can pilot any ship in the galaxy with expertise, who knows everything about every system of every possible type of spaceship, and who is extremely motivated and just a sort of incredible generalist. You don't really pick a class anymore. There's no kind of idea of like this person's better at that thing than the other person. Oh, they're also expert hackers, all of them. So that's who you play. You play this kind of like freak of nature who is just brilliant at everything. Not everything, but just at these particular skills that help them do this one thing. And so everything has to serve that fantasy. And if I think of something people suggest all the time for Heat Signature is, you should be able to build your own ships. And it's like, yeah, I know how to do that. I could make a system for that. It would take time. It would be a big job. But afterwards, you would be able to design your own ships. But that is beyond the scope. That's not who you are. You're not a shipbuilder. There's absolutely no part of the fantasy of Heat Signature that ties into that. There's nothing about it that makes you, that is about being an engineer, that is about being an architect, that is about being a production manager. You're not a factory worker. You're not a ship designer. You are a fucking amazing commando genius, superhuman. And anything that ties into that, I'm happy to explore, I'm happy to expand. But anything that doesn't, it just has to be left behind, because this is going to take long enough. Making you this ridiculous space commando is going to take long enough. That involves enough different things that it's going to be a while before I actually finish it. So that's one reason that it doesn't feel, or at least that's how I tell between ideas that are scope creep, or what did I say? Scope drift or feature creep, versus ideas that are actually expanding the idea, expanding the concept, making the game better. And the way I sort of reassure myself that I'm not making this a total vaporware project where it's just getting so big that it'll never be finished, is I play it. My justification for why this scope expansion is worthwhile is not, hey, look at this design document, wouldn't it be cool if that game existed? My justification is, look at this game right now, play the thing I've already made. You can't play the thing I've already made. Only I can play the thing I've already made. And people at Rezzed recently in London, and some people at GDC recently in San Francisco, and whatever other events I go to. And at some point some testers online, although I don't know exactly when that will happen. There will be opportunities to play this thing, but in purely theoretical terms, if I'm trying to explain to you why it was worth adding this feature and this feature, I don't need to point to some theoretical design document. I can show you I've already added it and it really works. It really changes the feel of the game. It was difficult to, the thing I've added lately, this nebula thing, a galactic map, space stations, randomly generated coloured nebulae that make the shape of the galaxy and make it all this giant place where everything you do has some relevance to this galactic map, and you are working to expand your faction's territory or whatever you choose to do in that context. All of that is in there, and it works, and it has changed the feel of the game in a dramatic way. But it took a lot of work, not just to make it, but also to make it fit with what we already had, because what we already had was a space game where you could zoom out so far and no further. And once I let you zoom out further than that and see the galaxy, there was a big problem in that we didn't know how to. We can show you the galaxy map, we can make nebulae, fluffy clouds and space stations be like stars, one within them. I hope that noise isn't weird for you, but my dishwasher just started kicking into gear. But the problem with it was that there was no in-between that. Like, the galactic map looked good and the local map looked good, but as you zoomed out smoothly, you would go past lots of stages where it didn't look good, where the individual stars and gas clouds of the local map were too small to fill the screen, but the nebulous clouds of the galactic map were so big that you didn't really see their detail, you just saw blurry shapes, and so there's this big kind of gap in between. And the big design challenge there was, how do we let you switch between these two things without feeling like we're restricting you, and making it feel natural so that every level of zoom looks good, but you don't feel like you're skipping levels of zoom between the local and the galactic. And my idea for that was, we'll just make every level of zoom look good. We'll just have a whole new set of assets for every level of zoom. We'll have ways to tile these things, it was all massively complicated things. And then John, our artist, replied to this and said, is there any actual gameplay between the local level and the galactic level? And I said, no. You never need to actually be at that zoom level for any functional reason. There's no reason to do it except for aesthetic reasons. And we were like, well, could we just skip it in some way? Oh yeah, we should just skip it. And skipping it is not an easy solution. There's a lot of difficulty in figuring out how do we skip it without that looking weird. But after a lot of thinking and a lot of re-strategizing, I think I found a way that feels really good. And not only does it feel good for that jump from local to galactic zoom, but it actually changes the way zoom works at the local scale and at the galactic scale, so that it's kind of much faster and more responsive. So instead of being this smooth thing, it used to be smooth, but it would take a long, long time to zoom from local to galactic zoom. And to be honest, it just makes your finger tired after a while. Like, playing it for 5 minutes is fine, but if you're going to play it for several hours at a time, having to scroll in and out all the time with a mouse wheel, actually, mouse wheels are not that good for long-term usage. And you still use the mouse wheel, but now it's much more kind of flicking between different levels. Out from like, that's a good expression of it. There you go. Now you understand fully how this works. I'll do a video of it at some point, but it's a system that basically involves skipping a bunch of things that I thought were essential, and as soon as you take them out, it makes it much easier and makes the thing feel more responsive and solves the problem about the difference between local and galactic zones, and it just makes the game feel really nice in a way that keeps me coming back to it and keeps me playing it. So basically, Heat Signature is becoming my game about scope. It's kind of like Gunpoint was a game where I didn't change the scope. I cut down the scope a lot from the plan, and then I just built the thing I was making, and I didn't let myself expand it because I was new at this. It was my first game ever. I didn't have the right to sort of say, I can do this more complex thing. Heat Signature is my first game where I've decided I'm not going to worry about the end date. I'm not going to worry about when it's going to come out. I'm not trying to get it out of the way. I'm not trying to get it done. I was trying to get Gunpoint done. I needed to get it done. I needed to prove that I could make a game. I needed to find out whether other people liked it. I needed to know whether it would sell. I needed that to happen. And I was sick of working on it. None of those things are true on Heat Signature. Every one of those is the opposite. So I like working on it. I'm not sick of it. I don't need it to get out there. I don't need to know how well it's going to sell yet. And my life is just going to be a lot happier if I'm not looking at this date in the future that I can't predict. I already know for sure I can't predict accurately, and pressuring myself to hit it, because that's just not working out. So I'm setting milestones now, and I started this video by saying it's Monday and I haven't worked on Heat Signature since Thursday, because on Thursday I hit my first milestone since this system, and that milestone was getting that galactic system in there, making sure that your missions that you do on the kind of day-to-day basis tie into the galactic map and can change the way the galactic map works and forge those new trade routes that I was talking about. And you can't make a trade route from your territory to a new station if it crosses through a trade route with an enemy faction, that kind of stuff. That kind of nitty-gritty thing that needs to be there and needs to be working, and I'll change it, I'm sure, before release, but I needed some version of it in there to know how a moment-to-moment mission ties into the galactic map that I've been making. And so yeah, I'm going to find out whether expanding the scope of the game as you go along can be done, whether it's madness always, or whether it's a thing that, whether you should be flexible like this, whether as you're making a game you should be thinking about, am I making something bigger than I thought it was, and can I cope with how big it is? Can I get this done? Which is a big concern when I'm expanding it. I'm not doing it without limit. I'm thinking very carefully about, is this the most efficient way to expand it? Am I adding a massive amount of new value for a small amount of work? And if I'm not, I won't do it. I won't add any feature that isn't massively efficient. It has to be incredibly efficient. It has to be very easy for me and very valuable for the player, or I just won't do it. And so yeah, if I finish it, if I make it, it will be a much bigger game than Gunpoint, and it will be basically an open world game. It won't be like Skyrim, that I used that reference point to make a point, but it wasn't to make you think that it's going to be anything like that. I'm not pre-writing any quests at the moment. It's all randomly generated. It will be procedural content, which is going to feel very different to an open world game that's full of quests. But it will be an open world. It will be a very large area. Right now we spawn a galaxy with 150 space stations in it, which is split between 5 different factions. And the idea is that each time you start the game, you'll be offered a selection of characters who will work for different factions. So if you want to work for one faction in particular, and you play as that character and then you die, the next time you start a new character, you can choose to work for the same faction, but as a new person. And all the territory the old person conquered in the previous life will still be conquered, and the galaxy will be a system between lives, but you will be a new person, and you'll be it'll be like a week later or something, so you won't find the old person's body necessarily and be able to pick up all his equipment, because I don't want to force you to do that, or I don't want to strongly incentivize you to do that, because it's boring to hunt down where you last died. But if you were really invested in that faction taking over a galaxy, then you can carry on with that. And one of the things I need to think about is, like, why do you care about that faction? Why would you want one of these factions to be better than the others? And so right now, like I said, there's no difference between factions at all. They're just colours. They're just different colours on a map. And I'd really like there to be some reason why you want this faction to win. And there are hints of that. There are things I can do, like when I look at a galactic map now, after I generate them, if there's a little faction on the fringe of a giant faction, you want to work for those guys. You just kind of feel like the little guys, if you were working for them, you would feel justified in everything you did. You would feel like it was, of course, you want to take some of their territory. Look at them, they dominate the whole fucking galaxy, and we've got this tiny amount, so you want to take it over. So I want to play into that a little bit and expand that. But that's as far as I've got with thinking about it. And I don't know how much that ties into the story thing. I don't want to pre-write too much because I don't want too much to be unique to your first playthrough. I want you to be able to replay it and to always have a reason to fight for the faction you're fighting for. So yeah, we'll find out whether expanding scope as you go is a good idea or whether it's a terrible disaster. So look forward to discovering that.